Okay, so today's Torah study is Parashas Behar, and the beginning of the portion discusses the Shemitah year and the Jubilee year. So the Shemitah year is we have a 7-year cycle, and the seventh year is that the year the land has to remain unworked. It's a sabbatical of the land before Hashem. And the Jubilee year is after 7 sabbatical years. Then the 50th year is the Jubilee year. What happens on the sabbatical year? The land is not allowed to be worked, and the loans are forgiven. And in the Jubilee year, the land goes back to its original owner, and freedom is announced in the land. So let's look at the first pasuk, and then let's look at some of the Hasidic commentaries on this powerful verse. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Of course, Mount Sinai for me, every time I think about Mount Sinai, I think about this time last year. And we see how much things have changed. But this time last year, I was visiting Mount Sinai. In May, I was traveling to Mount Sinai to see the actual Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia and to write a Torah on Mount Sinai. So very powerful that this is what God said to Moses on Mount Sinai. He taught the mitzvah of the sabbatical year. So the Sfas Emes writes as follows. The Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe, writes, it says specifically about the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, Mount Sinai. And the whole question is, what do you mean it says God spoke about to Moshe on Mount Sinai? God spoke about the Shemitah year and the Jubilee year on Mount Sinai. Wasn't everything given at Sinai? So why specifically about the sabbatical year, the Shemitah year and the Jubilee year, does it say Mount Sinai? So the Sfas Emes writes that the whole purpose is that the whole reason for resting on the 7th year is to nullify the natural world, just like when we came before Mount Sinai, meaning to say we're nullifying the natural world. How are we nullifying the natural world? The natural world is to work. The natural world is a person works the land. And now we're saying we're not going to work the land. This year we're going to be in the highest spiritual state by not working the land, by just connecting to God. We're taking a break from our regular work. We're going to spend the year on a high spiritual plane connecting to God. That is really at its core what the sabbatical year is about. And that at its core is the purpose of Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, we left the realm of the natural and entered into the realm of the supernatural. And this is also the sign of Shabbos. Shabbos, every week, what we do is we leave the natural world, which is to work, and we're pursuing our earthly needs. And on Shabbos, we stop working. And that's exactly what we do in the sabbatical year. We demonstrate that we are not going to be limited by the laws of nature, but rather we're going to recognize that this world is just a passageway to the ultimate world, which is the palace. And that is the world to come. And that's in the sabbatical year, we're living as though we're in the next world, meaning to say that the common denominators of Shabbos, Sinai, and the sabbatical year is the spiritual. The recognition that the world is above the rat race. The world is above just pursuing our need to make a livelihood. Now, we don't do that all the time, but we do it at certain select times, either every 7th day, every 7th year, and also we did it at Sinai. And he continues, the real life This is the Sfas Emes words. V'achius shel Adam Yisrael. The real existence of a Jew is not when we go to work and work the land. The real existence of the Jew is when we don't work the land, when we take a break, when we recognize that we're going to spend our time on the spiritual. So therefore, the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year are our departure from the path of nature. But since it's impossible to completely depart from the path of nature, comes along this mitzvah. Count 7 cycles, and through the counting, we come to the final stage, and that is the Jubilee year. And so therefore, that's how we come to this recognition of the purpose of our life. And so too, it's the same idea from Pesach to Shavuos. We're now on the 27th day of the Omer. What we're in essence doing is we're coming from Pesach, we're counting towards the standing at Sinai on the holiday of Shavuot and receiving the Torah. Okay, so that's the first idea. That's the idea of the Sfas Emes. Just to repeat it so everybody can chop it. Basic idea is, what is the connection between the sabbatical year and Sinai? What does the verse connect the two? To tell us that the purpose of Sinai and the purpose of the sabbatical year are the same, to be able to go above nature, to go above the natural way of life and connect to the spiritual. Let me pause for a moment, see if anybody has any questions before we go on. Okay, so no questions. All right, so now a second approach from the Chasam Sofer. So the Chasam Sofer first begins by citing Rashi. Rashi asks the question, Ma inyan Shemittah etzel Har Sinai? What's the relationship between the sabbatical year and Mount Sinai? And so Rashi's answer is that just like the sabbatical year was said with all its generalities and specifics at Sinai, so too all of the mitzvos were said in all its generalities and specifics at Sinai. Meaning to say that the sabbatical year, the Shemitah, is just an example of the fact it's a paradigm for all the other commandments that they were said in all their specifics and generalities at Sinai. And to teach us that fundamental idea. So, in this context, the Chasam Sofer writes, "V'lama parat hakosov hazeh davka etzel Shmitah." So, his question is, okay, fine. The sabbatical year is just the stand-in for all the commandments, and all the commandments were taught at Sinai. But then why does the Torah tell it to us only about the sabbatical year? It could have picked any mitzvah to tell us this. Why does it specifically tell it to us about the sabbatical year? The Chasam Sofer's answer is that it is the sabbatical year that proves this concept of Torah from heaven. Because how is it possible for a human being to promise this promise? What's the promise that he made? That because even a politician wouldn't make such a promise. It says in the Torah, I will, because people are saying, well, if you can't work the land in the 7th year, we're going to starve. And the Torah says, "V'tziviti et birchati lachem b'shana shishit v'asat et tefillah l'shalosh shanim." The Torah says, I will make a command to my blessing, and I will bless you in the 6th year, and there will be enough in the 6th year to last you year 6, year 7, and year 8. Meaning to say, because you can't harvest in the sabbatical year, and you can't plant for the 8th year. So therefore, how could a human being, no politician would ever make such a promise. It's so easily verifiable and not accurate. It's so easily not accurate. So the only one who can make such a promise is Hashem. So this proves that the Torah the mitzvah of Shemitah is the only one where we see such a direct proof for God giving the Torah at Sinai, because it's only in the mitzvah of Shemitah that Hashem says that Hashem says, I'm going to give you this incredible blessing of getting your food, enough food for 3 years. And that's why it says specifically about the Shemitah year that it was given at Sinai. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay. The next comment, again, is from, this one is from the Beis David, but he again asks the question about, Rashi's question, which is, Ma inyan Shemitah etzar Sinai. What is the fundamental relationship between the sabbatical year and Sinai that the Torah connects them? Again, so far we've seen two answers. We've seen the Sfas Emes and the Chasam Sofer. The Sfas Emes says the purpose of Shemitah and Sinai is to help us go to the spiritual, beyond nature. And the Chasam Sofer is saying it proves, the sabbatical year is what proves the Torah came from heaven because of the promises that God makes about if we observe the mitzvah of the sabbatical year. Comes along the Beis David and says, I'll tell you how we can answer this question. So, he gives a very complicated answer. So I was thinking of skipping it, but then I said, no, people can hold it. People can hold it together. So everybody should pay a little bit closer attention than usual. I know everybody usually pays extremely close attention. Everybody should pay a little closer attention than usual, and then you'll hop it. So basically, the Rashba says, why were the Jewish people ever forced into exile? Why were the Jewish people ever punished with being exiled from the land of Israel? Our ancestors had a complaint. And what was the complaint? The complaint was that we were forced to accept the Torah because God held the Torah over us like a barrel when we stood God held the mountain over us like a barrel at Mount Sinai and said, and forced us to accept it. So we were always forced. So therefore, why are we being punished for deviating from the law when in fact we never really fully accepted it? We were forced to accept it. So the Rashba's answer is that the Torah was only given, the land of Israel was only given to the Torah. The Jewish people were only given the land of Israel on account of the keeping of the Torah. And when we didn't keep the Torah, we lost the merit that we had to the land of Israel. So when he says that we only kept this Torah because we were forced to it, that refers to mitzvos that relate to our body. But the mitzvos that relate to the land, that there's no claim, because the land itself says you want to be worthy of the land. Well, then you have to keep the mitzvos that relate to the land, and that's why it says specifically about Shemitah, Mount Sinai, since the giving of the Torah was against our will, and therefore we could claim we were forced to do it. But the mitzvah of Shemitah, which is an obligation of the land, nevertheless would still need to be upheld because the land needs to be rested on the sabbatical year. It might be a little confusing, so I'm going to say it again. Basically, there's a Gemara in Shabbos 87a that says that the Jewish people, when they stood at Sinai, when our ancestors stood at Sinai, were forced to accept the Torah. That God held the mountain over our heads and said, either accept the Torah or you're going to die. So in that context, Rashba asks the question, well, if that's the case, if we only accepted the Torah under duress, then why, when we didn't keep the Torah, are we being punished for that? Why are we being exiled from the land of Israel because we didn't keep the Torah? The Torah was forced upon us. And so the Rashba's answer is that it's true we didn't keep, that the Torah is accepted under duress, but that only is an excuse when it comes to being exiled for the land, that we shouldn't be exiled for the mitzvos that are just related to our own body. Like, for example, not to eat on Yom Kippur. So that's a mitzvah that relates to us personally. So that, yeah, we accepted that under duress. So we shouldn't be exiled from the land if we don't keep that. But the mitzvahs that relate to the land itself, that's the very reason why we're allowed to live in the land of Israel, because we keep those mitzvahs. And so therefore, if we don't keep the mitzvahs of the land, then the land spits us out. And so therefore, since we didn't keep the sabbatical year, we never properly kept the sabbatical year. For this reason, the land spit us out. And that's why it needs to say specifically the Shemitah year was given at Mount Sinai, meaning to say that since we could claim, oh, we shouldn't have been exiled because we were forced. So therefore, the Torah is reminding us, yeah, but about the sabbatical year, that's a mitzvah that you're required to keep in order to merit the idea of living in the land of Israel. Anyway, that's the explanation of the base David. And I want to just share one more about this question about what's the relationship between the Shemitah year and the sabbatical year. I'll just share one more explanation. And this is the explanation of, hold on. Rev, so this is Rav Trunk Mikutna. So let's see what he says. He says as follows. It says, Rashi says, what's the relationship between Shemitah and Mount Sinai? Weren't all the commandments given at Sinai? And in the next verse it says, Vishavta Aretz Shabbos Hashem. The land will rest, will be rest before God. Rashi explains that we have to rest for the name of Hashem, for the sake of Hashem, just like it says at the Shabbos of creation. So the question is, how do we explain this connection? Rashi says, rest for Hashem, just like it says about the Shabbos of creation. So what's really the relationship between Shabbos and the sabbatical year? Shabbos is about delight. It's about appreciating the physical beauties and gifts that God gives us in this world. So therefore, we have to be reminded that when we celebrate on Shabbos, when we're having delight in the Shabbos, we have to be reminded that it has to be the purpose of God, that the only reason why we should be celebrating Shabbos is for the purpose of Hashem. But the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, this is a burden that we can't work in the sabbatical year. So, meaning to say, the Chazal said only those who have tremendous strength can fulfill this mitzvah. So of course it has to be done for the purpose of serving God. So why is Rashi reminding us that when we don't work on the sabbatical year, it has to be done for the purpose of serving Hashem? What else would it be done for? That's the question that's raised. And the answer from this question is that we could say, this is a anti-socialist suggestion that he's about to give. Hold on, let me look up exactly this commentary so I can give you his exact dates. Hold on, give me 1 second. Let me look him up, his exact dates. Hold on. Okay, so this is Rav Yisrael Eliyahu Yahushua Trunk of Kutno. He basically he lived from 1821 to 1893, and so Okay, very interesting. He was one of the first rabbis to support the idea that there's a leniency, that there's a leniency to what's called a heter mechira, to sell part of the land in the year of the sabbatical year in order to observe the sabbatical year. So, okay. So he writes as follows. He said, many people wanted to say that this mitzvah of the sabbatical year is about improving society, improving, like from a socialist perspective, to say, okay, because nobody's allowed to work the land and everybody could go in and farm wherever and harvest wherever they want. Maybe it's about making an egalitarian society, or maybe it's about making a society, doing crop rotation. So, letting the land lie fallow for a year in order to be stronger. So people have all sorts of socioeconomic reasons for the purpose of the sabbatical year. And so therefore, some people of little faith might say that this is not a religious law, but Moshe loved the Jewish people. And so therefore, he was making social reforms. And so therefore, he's trying to solve socioeconomic problems. So therefore, the Torah has to tell us that this is a mitzvah of sanctity. It has to be done for the purpose of Hashem, just like all the other commandments. So therefore, that's why specifically here, why we might have thought that this was a mitzvah that's just a socio-economic mitzvah about improving society. Therefore, we have to say, no, this is from Sinai. This specifically is from Sinai. So therefore, people might, because otherwise the alternatively is to say it supports somebody's specific ideology. That's the idea. So again, just before we go on, we've seen now 4 reasons why it says the Torah that the mitzvah of Shemitah was specifically given at the purpose of the mitzvah of Shemitah was specifically given at Sinai. First, we saw Sfas Emes and the Chasam Sofer, then the Beis David, and now we're seeing the mitzvah, the opinion of Rabbi Yisrael Yoshua Trunk. And just to remind ourselves, what are these 4 approaches? The first approach is the Sfas Emes, is to tell us that it's just like Har Sinai is to take us close to Hashem, beyond nature, into the spiritual. So too, that's the purpose of the Shemitah. Second, we saw the Chasam Sofer, and he's to tell us that it's because Shemitah proves that the Torah is from heaven, because it makes such an incredible promise that the Torah was given that in the 6th year we're going to get enough produce to support us for 3 years. And then we have the third approach of the Beis David, is to tell us that specifically it says Sinai by Shemitah because all the other mitzvos would not have been enough for us to be kicked out of the land because we were forced. But the mitzvah of getting the land of Israel is specifically related to keeping the Shemitah. And so therefore, if we didn't keep it, we would have been expelled. And then the 4th reason is from Yisrael Yoshua Trunk. And he says it's to tell us that it needs to be, that it's specifically from Sinai, because we might have thought that this was just a socio-economic master plan by Moses to make society function better, give some reforms. So therefore, we're being told, no, it's all from Sinai. This mitzvah, above all else, is all from Sinai, specifically this mitzvah. Okay, we'll just pause for a moment, see if anybody has any questions. Okay, so the next pasuk, where we just did the first verse, the next verse states, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, Ki tavoa aretz asher ani nosin lachem, when you come to the land that I will give to you, v'shavsa aretz shabbos laHashem. So, and then the land will rest, resting before God. So the first comment here comes from the Majitzer Rebbe. The Majitzer Rebbe says, why does it say, when you come to the land that I will give you? Why does it say specifically that I will give you? So let's look at what he says here. The Mudritzer Rebbe. I always see our friend Shaul who teaches the Rambam. He's a direct descendant of the Mudritzer Rebbe, so that's why he has the name Shaul, and so too is the Admor of Mudritz is Rav Shaul Yedidya Eliyahu Tov Mimudritz. It's the same name, he's direct descendant. So the word I, Hadiyuk b'milat ani, the precise word here, I, is because the Jewish people in the lands that they're scattered, the I of them is mixed up. The independence, the specific independence of the Jewish people is not recognizable. That's why the verse says, when you come to the land that I give to you, meaning to say, in the land when you come there, I am giving it to you. I specifically, meaning to say that the I, the relationship of God, is going to be clearest about the Jewish people, specifically when they're in the land of Israel. The I of God, that's where the Jewish people reach their culmination in their identification with Hashem. Okay. Second approach, Kitavo al haaretz. This is a hard one to read, but this is something that we have to read. When you come to the land that I will give to you, and the land will rest a sabbatical year before God. Vizet hasigu. You'll reach this through a difficult struggle. How will you come to this land? Only through battles. And don't think, a person should not think after they defeat their battle. This goes back to what we spoke about at the very beginning with our friend Lincoln. We spoke about this, about what's the spiritual reaction to a military victory. And a person should never say, and somebody asks, well, how do we see the role of God in this? When a person has a military victory, a person should not ever think, my strength did this for me. Or this specific warrior, or this specific ruler did this. Rather, a person needs to always remember, when you come to the land that I give to you, meaning to say that without the kindness of God, without the miracles of God, without the hidden and revealed miracles of God, we would never achieve what we achieved. V'shavta ha'aretz shabbos la'Hashem, and the land shall rest for God. And so therefore, this is what it means, that the person who is the most believing in Hashem will recognize that they will keep the mitzvah of Shemittah. The purpose of the sabbatical year is to demonstrate to us, we have come into the land, we have worked the land, we think that we overcame all of our enemies with our battles. It's at that moment we have to remind ourselves that everything we achieved was because of Hashem, and we have faith in God. And that's why at that moment, we demonstrate our faith. How? By not working the land. And as an expression of our faith to Hashem specifically from that moment. I see there's a comment. So the question is, does the person who lives in Israel have an advantage in getting spiritually aligned to Hashem? It's a very important question that somebody's asking me. And I don't think that person who lives in Israel has an advantage. On the one hand, they do have an advantage because there's more mitzvot that one can do, and one's living in a stronger Jewish community. There's no question it's a much more vibrant, dynamic, wider, broader, and deeper Jewish community. On the other hand, precisely because it's such a strong Jewish community, it makes it it has other challenges. And the other challenges are that if you are in America, if you want to identify with your Judaism, really, there's only two ways. One is by being a strong supporter of Israel, and also by being a religious Jew, studying Torah, going to synagogue. But the other ways, like the cultural Jews, speaking Yiddish, it's much harder. It's much more difficult to identify as a Jew in that manner. I guess you could give money to like a politician who's Jewish, but it's much harder. But in Israel, you can just identify with the culture around you, and your Jewish identity does not come into question, which ironically makes it much harder to be a religious Jew, because there's ways to be Jewish without being religious. That's why a lot of my friends who are in Israel have told me that they think it's much harder for their friends, for their children, to be religious Jews in the land of Israel than it is in America. Because in America, the way you're Jewish is to be religious. In Israel, the way you're Jewish is to be part of the culture. You don't need to be religious. I'm saying that in their mind, you don't need to be religious in order to be Jewish. So that's the great test. So to answer your question, I don't actually think that Israeli has an advantage getting spiritually closer to Hashem. I think everybody has disadvantages. And the way you can come close to Hashem is by working on it. It's not easy, it's very hard. So let us go on. Let's go to the next one. This comes from the Mea Shiloach. Who's the Mea Shiloach? He's the Ishbitzer Rebbe. Ishbitzer Rebbe is also a student coming out of the Hasidus of Rebbe Melech. And he says as follows. Says in the verse, when you come to the land that I will give to you, Vishav ta'aretz Shabbos Hashem, and the land will rest a Shabbos for Hashem. This is the promise of Hashem to the Jewish people. This goes to your question. This goes exactly to the question that was just raised. It goes, everything I said, the Mei Shiloach says it's wrong. Of course, he wasn't living in the land of Israel at the time. He didn't see the country of Israel and the culture. But this is the answer he gave. When you come to the land that I will give to you, and the land will rest a Shabbos for Hashem. So it says, this is the promise that Hashem is making for Israel. When you come to the land, your hearts will be in nachas, that the land will teach the heart, meaning to say, the land will rest, that your hearts will be at peace, meaning to say, it's promising you. We have to read this pasuk as a promise. Now, when you come to the land, then the land will rest. But the Mei Shiloach wrote this before seeing what's going on today in Israel. He wrote this in, I think, the 19th century. He woke up on the Ishbitzer lived. He didn't see the challenges of being religious in a Zionist world. He didn't see that. So he thought it would be very easy spiritually. But in that sense, he was wrong. I don't know if he was wrong, but it's not as simple. Okay, I always like to do the Drash Ve'Iyun, the Raisha Rebbe. The reason I always like to do him is because when we went to Ukraine in 2018 and we saw where the Raisha Rebbe, we saw his story. So I always like to say what he says. Shabbos Hashem. So he again quotes the Rashi that the sabbatical year will be for the purpose of Hashem, just like it says by the Shabbos of Parshas Bereshit. Just like the purpose of the Shabbos means to say that you shouldn't engage in nonsense, but rather you should use the Shabbos to work on our spiritual goals, to come closer to Torah, to improve our character traits, to do spiritual improvement, so too in the sabbatical year, that a person has a whole year where they're not going to work. What are we going to do during that time? The Torah is commanding us that the whole year needs to be a Shabbos for Hashem. That the whole year has to be a year spent on spiritual improvement. Otherwise, the year will be for a snare and a stumbling block. And this is hinted to in the words, just like it says about the Shabbos of creation. That just like the purpose of Shabbos is to come closer to Hashem, so too the purpose of the sabbatical year is to come closer to Hashem. Okay, so now we'll do one more idea. This is from the Yismach Moshe. Yismach Moshe says as follows. He says, what do you mean the land will rest a Shabbos for Hashem? In 6 years, how many Shabbosos are there in 6 years? Around 300. 54 weeks a year, but in the Jewish calendar, a little bit less. There's 54 parshios, but we double some. So it's around 50 weeks. So it's around 300, maybe 52 weeks. So there's around 300 Shabbosos. And in these 300 Shabbosos, the earth is growing with many fruits. And so therefore, we have to have a sabbatical year to cancel out that Shabbos where the land was growing. We have to cancel out approximately 300 days aside from the Shabboses. So therefore, we have to have another year to atone for the fact that our land was working on Shabbos all those 6 years. Because so basically that's the idea. And since during the sabbatical year, then the whole land is also growing, therefore, we're going to have basically that will equal every Shabbos during that sabbatical year. We're going to need another whole year to correspond to all the 7 years in which the land continued to grow. And so therefore, the way we correspond to that is through the Jubilee year. So that's basically the growth that grows on Shabbos in the sabbatical year. So that's what his idea is. This is the idea of the Yismach Moshe, that this is coming, that the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year is coming to atone for the growth that happens on Shabbos and the sabbatical years. Anyway, a beautiful idea, very cute idea. So a lot of beautiful ideas. And if anybody has any questions before we stop, this is the time.